Look, I'm not saying the Galactic Council was full of idiots, but when they declared humans Category 5 Death World Apex Predators and then immediately hired them as universal daycare workers, someone really wasn't thinking things through. Or maybe they were thinking too hard. It's hard to tell with bureaucrats who have 17 eyes and communicate through color-changing mucous membranes. But here we are. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The species who ate their way to the top of Earth's food chain, who looked at wolves and said, yeah, those would make great pets, who saw venomous spiders and decided to keep them in glass boxes for fun, were now the galaxy's most sought-after babysitters. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Which, coincidentally, humans also invented dozens of variations of because, apparently, one stabby thing wasn't enough. Marcus Webb didn't think about any of this philosophical nonsense when he signed up for the Interspecies Juvenile Care Program. He thought about the pay, which was, and I cannot stress this enough, absolutely ridiculous. Enough to retire on after 5 years. Enough to buy a small moon. Enough to make his mother stop asking when he was going to get a real job and settle down. The fact that it involved taking care of baby aliens? Sure. Whatever. Marcus had helped raise his 3 younger siblings while his parents worked double shifts. He'd wrangled his nephew through the terrible twos, which had actually lasted until the kid was 4, because apparently his sister's genetics were extra spicy. How different could alien kids be? Narrator voice. They could be very different. Marcus found this out on his first day at the Zephyros Station childcare facility, a gleaming structure that floated in orbit around a planet whose name he couldn't pronounce without dislocating something. The facility director, a being named Quilxara, who looked like a peacock, had a baby with a squid, and then that baby went to law school, was giving him the tour with all the enthusiasm of someone explaining funeral arrangements. Here we have the Nivoran section. Quilxara warbled, their fronds quivering in what Marcus had learned was the alien equivalent of barely suppressed panic. They require constant moisture and cannot tolerate temperatures above 15 degrees Celsius. Next to them, the Thoraxian young, who will die if exposed to anything below 40 degrees Celsius. This has been a logistical nightmare. Sounds like you need a better thermostat, Marcus offered helpfully. Quilxara's eye stalks swiveled to look at him with an expression that transcended species barriers. It clearly said, I am being paid to tolerate you. The previous caretaker, Quilxara continued, their voice dropping to what Marcus assumed was a whisper, but sounded like a goose being strangled, lasted 3 days before requesting an immediate transfer to sanitation duty in the methane waste processing sector. They said, and I quote, I would rather swim in toxic excrement than spend another hour with these spawn. Yikes. Indeed. The caretaker before that resigned after 2 days. Simply walked out. We found them in a supply closet, rocking back and forth, muttering something about too many teeth. Marcus was beginning to understand why the pay was so good. They stopped in front of a large door marked with symbols that probably said something important. Marcus was still working on learning basic galactic standard, which was apparently the linguistic equivalent of someone throwing all Earth's languages in a blender and hitting puree. This, Quilxara announced with all the gravitas of someone introducing the final boss, is where we keep the Velkari. The what now? Velkari? Apex predators from the Velcro system. Their adult form has been described as nightmare fuel with claws by several traumatized xenobiologists. The cubs are challenging. Challenging how? Quilxara's Franz did a complicated shimmy that Marcus's translator unhelpfully rendered as panicked laughter mixed with despair. Not ominous at all. They bite. They have what you would call boundary issues. They do not understand the concept of gentle play. Their idea of affection involves attempted mauling. We've had to replace the furniture in their enclosure 7 times this month. It's the 5th of the month. Yes. Marcus peered through the observation window. Inside was what looked like someone had taken a tiger, a bear, and a honey badger, thrown them in a genetic blender, added some features from a fever dream, and produced something that was objectively adorable and objectively terrifying in equal measure. There were 3 cubs. They had thick, dark fur with bioluminescent stripes that pulsed in patterns along their flanks. 6 legs, each ending in retractable claws that looked sharp enough to perform surgery, probably without anesthesia. Their faces were broad and flat, with forward-facing eyes that gleamed with unmistakable intelligence and unmistakable mischief. And teeth. So many teeth. Their mouths looked like they were sponsored by a knife company. As Marcus watched, one of the cubs pounced on another, and they tumbled across the room in a ball of fur, claws, and what sounded like angry, squeaky toys. The 3rd cub was systematically destroying what might have once been a climbing structure, but was now modern art titled wreckage. "They're perfect," Marcus said. Quilxara's translator made a sound like a computer crashing. "I'm sorry, repeat that?" "They're like puppies. Deadly, over-caffeinated puppies with too many legs, but puppies." The human word puppies refers to juvenile canines, yes? The predators you domesticated thousands of years ago? That's the one. Your species has a documented psychological disorder where you find dangerous things cute and attempt to befriend them. I was informed of this, but I didn't truly believe it until now. Quilxara's Franz had gone completely flat. "You're actually excited about this?" "I mean, yeah, look at them. Little guys are just playing." That play has resulted in 3 separate containment breaches, 17 destroyed monitoring devices, and 1 incident we've agreed to never speak of again involving an unauthorized presence in the ventilation system. Marcus was already opening the door. "Wait, you need protective gear. There's a protocol. You should observe them first from a safe distance." But Marcus was already inside, and Quilxara's protests became muffled background noise as the door sealed shut behind him. The 3 cubs immediately stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the intruder. 6 pairs of luminous eyes locked onto Marcus like targeting systems. "Hey guys," Marcus said, dropping into a crouch. "Basic animal handling. Make yourself smaller, less threatening." "What's up?" The cubs looked at each other. There was a moment of silent communication that Marcus could almost see happening. Then, moving as one unit because of course they did, they began to advance. They moved like liquid death, low to the ground, muscles rippling under their fur. The bioluminescent stripes pulsed faster, which Marcus figured was probably not a "hello, we're friendly" signal. Their lips pulled back, revealing multiple rows of serrated teeth that evolution had clearly spent a lot of time perfecting for the specific purpose of ruining someone's day. Outside, he could see Quilxara frantically gesturing at him. The translator picked up muffled shrieks of "no sudden movements" and "try not to die. The paperwork is extensive." The largest cub reached him first. It was maybe 3 feet long, not counting the tail that lashed behind it like a furry whip with attitude. This close, Marcus could see the intelligence in its eyes. not just animal cunning, actual thinking intelligence. This thing was evaluating him, sizing him up, making decisions. It opened its mouth. Rows of teeth gleamed. And then it bit his hand. Not a nibble, not a test bite. A full-on chomp that would have taken fingers off a lesser being. Marcus felt the pressure, felt the sharp points of those teeth against his skin. The cub's jaw strength was insane. If it wanted to, it could have crushed the bones in his hand like breadsticks. Here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy was still trying to understand. Humans are persistence predators. Humans are endurance hunters. Humans are the species that evolved to get stabbed, bitten, poisoned, and beaten, and then just keep going because spite is apparently a valid evolutionary strategy. Marcus's hand hurt. It hurt a lot. He could feel those teeth pressing into his skin hard enough to almost break through. But almost was doing some heavy lifting there. And Marcus Webb didn't raise 3 siblings and a demon nephew by giving up when things got bitey. So he didn't pull away. He just looked down at the cub and said, "You done?" The cub's eyes widened. Confusion flickered across its features. In its short life, everything it bit either ran away or stopped moving entirely. Nothing had ever just sat there, looking bored. The other 2 cubs had frozen mid-stalk, watching this development with fascination. Marcus waited. His hand was starting to go numb, which was probably not great. But he'd had worse. There was that time his nephew bit him during a tantrum and broke skin. There was that time he'd grabbed a hot pan without a mitt because he was an idiot, and adrenaline made you do stupid things. This was fine. This was totally fine. The cub's grip loosened slightly. It made a sound somewhere between a growl and a whimper, like it was asking a question it didn't know how to phrase. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Marcus said quietly. "You're not actually trying to hurt me. You're just testing, seeing what I'm made of. I get it. Trust issues. Been there." Slowly, carefully, Marcus moved his other hand and gently placed it on the cub's head. The fur was incredibly soft, like someone had weaponized velvet. The cub's eyes went comically wide, and its bioluminescent stripes started pulsing in a rapid, erratic pattern. "Easy," Marcus murmured, the same tone he'd used on his siblings during thunderstorms, on his nephew during nightmares, on every scared kid he'd ever helped. "You're okay? I'm not gonna hurt you. Not gonna run away either. You can bite all you want, little dude. It's not gonna change anything." The cub released his hand. Then, in a movement that made Marcus's heart do several backflips, it lowered its head and pressed it against his palm. The universal gesture of submission, trust, and something that looked an awful lot like affection. Outside the enclosure, Quilxara had gone completely silent. Through the window, Marcus could see the director's Franz standing straight up in what was probably the alien equivalent of shocked disbelief. The other 2 cubs crept closer. One of them, slightly smaller with a distinctive scar over its left eye, sniffed Marcus's leg with intense concentration. The third, which had patches of lighter fur like someone had spilled bleach on it, made a chirping sound and head-butted Marcus's knee. "Okay," Marcus said, fighting back the biggest smile of his life, because these were supposed to be terrifying apex predators, and he was supposed to be professional. "Okay, yeah, we're doing this. Who's a good nightmare creature?" "You are. Yes, you are." The largest cub, the one who'd bitten him, made a rumbling sound that Marcus realized with absolute delight was purring. It was purring. This thing that looked like it was designed by a committee of horror movie directors was purring like an oversized cat. Marcus spent the next hour on the floor of the enclosure while 3 Velkari cubs climbed all over him, occasionally gnawed on his hands with significantly less pressure than before, and generally treated him like the galaxy's most durable jungle gym. By the time Quilzara cautiously opened the door to check if he was still alive, Marcus was flat on his back with a cub on his chest, one sprawled across his legs, and the third attempting to fit his entire arm in its mouth in what was clearly an affectionate gesture. "How?" Quilzara whispered, their fronds quivering with emotion that the translator couldn't quite capture. "How are you alive?" "They're just babies," Marcus said, scratching the scarred cub behind its ears. It made a sound like a broken motorboat, and its back leg started thumping against the floor. "They don't want to hurt anyone. They're just playing rough, and nobody ever played back." "Playing back? You call nearly losing your hand playing back?" "I've had worse from my nephew. Kid went through a phase where biting was his primary form of communication. We worked through it." Quilzara was quiet for a long moment. "The Velkari cubs have been here for 3 cycles. They were surrendered by their clan pack because they were deemed too aggressive for proper socialization. Too wild. The adult Velkari said they were broken and could not be trained. We've been attempting to rehabilitate them, but every caretaker has failed. Until you." "They're not broken," Marcus said firmly, looking down at the cub on his chest. It blinked up at him with eyes that held galaxies. "They're just scared. Nobody taught them how to be gentle because nobody was patient enough to let them learn." The purring intensified. Over the following weeks, Marcus became a permanent fixture in the Velkari enclosure. The cubs, who he'd named Ripley, Vasquez, and Hudson, after characters from his favorite old movie because he was a nerd and proud of it, followed him everywhere. They learned bite inhibition by the revolutionary method of Marcus not reacting when they bit too hard, which apparently broke their tiny predator brains in the best way. "You're supposed to yelp or pull away," Quilzara observed during one of their daily check-ins, watching as Ripley gnawed on Marcus's forearm while he filled out behavioral reports with his other hand. "Every instinct says you should show pain." "Yeah, but they're not trying to cause pain. They're exploring, testing boundaries. If I yelp, I'm telling them they succeeded in hurting me, which reinforces the behavior. If I just treat it like no big deal, they figure out on their own that maybe they should ease up. That is the most backwards, illogical, somehow effective training method I've ever witnessed. Welcome to human psychology. We're a mess, but we get results." The cubs grew, and kept growing because apparently Velkari cubs experienced growth spurts that could only be described as aggressive. Within 2 months, they'd each put on another 50 pounds of muscle, teeth, and terrible decisions. They were roughly the size of full-grown lions now, with the temperament of overgrown puppies and the combat capabilities of tanks with anxiety. Other species who worked at the facility started giving Marcus's section a AAE wide berth. There were rumors, whispered stories in the break room about the human who tamed the untamable, who played with apex predators like they were house cats, who'd been bitten so many times his arms looked like roadmaps of scars, and yet he just kept coming back. "You could work in any section," one of the Nivaran caretakers told him one day, their amphibious face wrinkled with concern. "The Glibnar young are delightful. They sing. They never bite. Why stay with the Velkari?" Marcus looked through the window to where Ripley, Vasquez, and Hudson were engaged in what he'd termed aggressive cuddling, which looked like a fight to the death, but was actually just how they showed affection. As he watched, Ripley noticed him and immediately abandoned the pile, bounding over to press her massive head against the glass. Her purr was loud enough to rattle the window. "Because they need me," Marcus said simply. The turning point came during what would later be referred to in station reports as the incident, with a capital T and I. A delegation from the Velkari homeworld arrived. They'd heard rumors that their defective cubs had been somehow rehabilitated and wanted to see for themselves. The delegation consisted of 3 adult Velkari, each standing nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder, masses of muscle and fury wrapped in fur and ceremonial armor that looked like it was forged from meteorites and bad intentions. They were led by a female named Cathara, whose scarred face and missing eye spoke of a lifetime of combat. She moved with the casual grace of someone who knew exactly how dangerous they were and didn't feel the need to prove it. When she spoke, her voice rumbled through the station's translator like distant thunder. "We have come to evaluate the cubs. If they are truly reformed, they may return to the clan pack. If not..." She let the sentence hang, but the implication was clear. Quilxara looked like they wanted to dissolve into their component molecules. The cubs have shown remarkable progress under human Marcus's care. Perhaps we could arrange a supervised observation. We will see them now, without supervision. Marcus stepped forward. "With respect, ma'am, I don't think that's a good idea." Cathara's head swiveled to look at him. Up close, she was even more intimidating. She could have used him as a toothpick. Her remaining eye gleamed with predatory intelligence that made the cubs look like amateurs. "You are the human, the soft skin who claims to have tamed warrior cubs. I didn't tame them. I just taught them it's okay to be gentle sometimes. Velkari are not gentle. Weakness is death. Sentiment is failure. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I once watched a guy try to fight a street sign because it looked at him wrong. The temperature in the corridor dropped several degrees. Quilxara made a sound like a dying printer. Several other staff members found urgent reasons to be literally anywhere else. Cathara leaned down until her snout was inches from Marcus's face. He could feel her breath, hot and smelling like meat and something spicy. Could see every scar, every mark of battle. Could count the teeth in her half-open mouth. "You dare insult our ways? I dare say that throwing away kids because they don't fit your exact specifications is messed up in any language." Cathara's lips pulled back in what could have been a snarl or a smile. With Velkari, it was hard to tell. "Then prove they are worth keeping, human. Face them as we would. Enter their space. Survive their greeting. If you emerge standing, we will reconsider. If you do not..." She shrugged, a gesture that involved her entire body. "Then you were too weak to matter anyway. Marcus, you don't have to do this," Quilxara whispered urgently. "We can refuse. Site safety protocols. It's fine." Marcus was already walking toward the enclosure. "They're my kids. I know them. They have not seen you in 3 days due to the station maintenance. The cubs have been agitated, aggressive. They destroyed another climbing structure and attempted to breach the door 17 times. Sounds about right. They get separation anxiety. That is not comforting information." Marcus opened the door and stepped inside. Behind him, he heard the assembled crowd collectively hold their breath. He didn't blame them. Even after months of work, the cubs were objectively terrifying when they wanted to be. And right now, they very much wanted to be. All 3 of them were in the far corner, hackles raised, stripes pulsing angry reds and oranges. They'd heard the adult Velkari outside, smelled them. Something primal had been triggered, some instinct that said danger, threat, fight, or flee. Ripley snarled. the sound echoing off the walls like someone had weaponized a thunderstorm. "Hey guys," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "Miss me?" Ripley charged. If you've never seen a several hundred-pound apex predator in full sprint, let me paint you a picture. It's like watching a missile with fur and personal vendetta. The ground shook. Those 6 legs ate up distance with terrifying efficiency. Claws extended, teeth bared, eyes locked on target with singular purpose. Marcus stood his ground, didn't flinch, didn't run, just opened his arms and said, "Come here, girl." Ripley hit him like a truck made of affection and poor impulse control. The impact drove Marcus back several steps, but he kept his feet, wrapping his arms around her massive neck as she made sounds that were half growl, half whine. Her tail lashed frantically. Her whole body vibrated with emotion. I know, I'm sorry," Marcus murmured, scratching behind her ears where she liked it. "Maintenance took forever. I missed you too." Vasquez and Hudson piled on immediately, creating a mountain of fur, human, and excessive enthusiasm. Marcus disappeared under the cuddle pile, his laughter muffled but genuine. Teeth gnawed gently on his arms, his shoulders, his head. Not to hurt, just to confirm he was real, he was here, he was theirs. Outside, the adult Velkari stood in absolute silence. When Marcus finally emerged from the pile, his hair was sticking up in 17 directions, his uniform was shredded in several places, and he had what was definitely going to be an impressive bruise on his shoulder. But he was grinning like an idiot, and the 3 cubs were arranged around him in a protective triangle, purring loud enough to register on seismic monitors. Kethera's expression was unreadable. She stared at Marcus for a long moment, then at the cubs, then back to Marcus. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer, still intimidating enough to peel paint, but softer. "You have their loyalty. This is not given easily among our kind. They're good kids, just needed someone to believe in them. They mauled 17 caretakers. The caretakers were scared. Kids can smell fear, makes them nervous. You were not afraid." Marcus thought about that. About the first day, when Ripley bit his hand hard enough to bruise bone. About every moment since when he'd been scratched, bitten, head-butted, and generally treated like a chew toy by creatures that could literally tear him apart. "Oh, I was terrified," he admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you run away. It means you care enough about the outcome to be worried. These guys just needed someone to care more than they were scared." Kethera was silent for another long moment. Then she dropped to one knee, bringing her massive head down to Marcus's level. It was a gesture of respect, and from the shocked sounds outside, apparently not one Velkari made lightly. "The cubs may stay with you, human. You have proven yourself more than worthy. You have given them something our entire clan pack could not. Patience." "They're not staying with me," Marcus said, and felt his heart break a little even as he said it. "They need to go home. With you. With their people. They will not survive. They are too soft now, too trusting. Then make sure they don't have to survive the same way. Make space for the ones who are different. Because Ripley, Vasquez, and Hudson, they're not broken. They're just a different kind of strong." Ripley head-butted his chest, nearly knocking him over. Marcus steadied himself and looked into her eyes. Those eyes that had been wild and desperate were now calm, confident, trusting. "I taught them to be gentle when they can be," Marcus continued. "But they still know how to be fierce when they need to be. That's not weakness, that's wisdom." Kethera studied him for a long, long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. "The cubs will return with us, but you will visit. Teach others of our kind your methods. We have much to learn from humans, it seems. We're mostly just stubborn and too dumb to know when we should quit. As I said, much to learn. The goodbyes were rough. Marcus spent his last day with the cubs teaching them what would probably be his final lessons. How to play gently with smaller beings. How to read emotional cues. How to trust that not everyone was a threat. When the time came to leave, Ripley refused to enter the transport. She planted herself in front of Marcus and growled at anyone who came close, even Cathera. Hudson and Vasquez followed suit, creating a wall of fur and loyalty between Marcus and the exit. "Come on, guys," Marcus said, his voice rough. "We talked about this. You need to go home." Ripley made a sound that could only be described as heartbroken. She pressed her head against his chest, purring desperately, as if the vibration alone could convince him to change his mind. Marcus wrapped his arms around her neck and let himself have one moment. One moment where he wasn't professional, wasn't the tough human who didn't cry, wasn't anything except a guy saying goodbye to someone he loved. "You're gonna be great," he whispered. "All three of you. You're gonna show everyone what I already know, that you're smart and strong and the best guys in the entire galaxy. And yeah, I'm gonna miss you like crazy. But you've got your family waiting. Real family. People who will understand you in ways I never could." He pulled back and looked at all three of them. His cubs, his kids, his best success and hardest goodbye. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "All of you." Ripley straightened, drew herself up to her full, considerable height. And then, in a gesture Marcus would remember for the rest of his life, she bowed her head. A deliberate, conscious acknowledgement of respect, gratitude, and something that transcended species. Hudson and Vasquez followed suit. Marcus bowed back, blinking hard, definitely not crying. "Shut up." As the transport lifted off, he watched through the viewport until they were just a speck, then nothing. Quilsara came to stand beside him, their fronds arranged in what he'd learned was a comforting pattern. "You changed them," the director said quietly. "Changed how their entire species sees strength and weakness. I just gave them space to be who they already were. That is more than anyone else was willing to give. You know." Quilsara hesitated. "We have 47 other species in this facility, many considered difficult, many given up on, if you were interested." "Yeah," Marcus said, wiping his eyes and definitely still not crying. "Yeah, I'm interested. When do I start?" Because that's the thing about humans. We're persistence predators. We don't give up. Not on hunts, not on dreams, and definitely not on kids. Somewhere, in a transport heading toward the Velcro system, 3 Velcari cubs curled together and purred in harmony. Their stripes pulsed in soft blues and greens, colors of contentment and peace. And in their dreams, they remembered the human who didn't run, who didn't fear, who taught them that strength and gentleness weren't opposites. They were just different sides of the same coin. The human coin, apparently, who knew?